There's something rather peculiar that happens when you begin to wake up. And by wake up, I don't mean simply opening your eyes in the morning or having a nice cup of coffee. I mean when you really begin to see through the game, when the veil of ordinary consciousness starts to slip and you catch a glimpse of what's actually going on here. It's quite marvelous, really. But here's the thing that nobody tells you. Once you've had that glimpse, once you've tasted that freedom, there are certain things you simply cannot share. Not because they're secret in some mystical hush-hush way, but because sharing them would be like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. It just doesn't work. And more than that, attempting to do so can actually create more confusion than clarity. So let me tell you about 5 things that if you are spiritually awake, you should never share. Not out of spiritual pride, not because you're part of some exclusive club, but simply because these things cannot be communicated in the way that ordinary information can be communicated. They're more like the scent of a flower. You can describe it all day long, but until someone smells it for themselves, they haven't really got it. Now, the first thing you must never share is your direct experience of awakening itself. You see, the moment you wake up, there's this tremendous urge to tell everyone about it. You want to grab people by the shoulders and say, look, I've seen it, it's all right here. We've been looking in the wrong direction the whole time. But what happens when you do this? The other person looks at you with a mixture of confusion and concern. They nod politely. They might even say, that's wonderful for you. But inside they're thinking you've gone a bit strange. Why is this? Because awakening is not an idea. It's not a concept that can be passed from one mind to another, like a recipe for bread. It's a lived reality. It's the difference between reading about swimming and actually being in the water. When you try to describe the water to someone who's never been wet, what do they hear? Just words, just sounds. The actual feeling of water, the way it holds you, the way it moves around your body, that cannot be captured in language. I once knew a man who had what you might call a profound spiritual experience. He was walking in the garden one evening, and suddenly everything became transparent. He saw that he was not a separate being walking through a garden, but rather the entire process of gardening was happening. There was no walker and no garden, just walking, gardening as one movement. Well, he was so excited by this that he rushed to tell his wife. And what did she say? She said, "That's nice, dear. Don't forget to take out the rubbish." You see, she couldn't receive what he was trying to give because she hadn't had the experience. It's like trying to explain the color red to someone who was born blind. You can talk about wavelengths of light. You can describe how it makes you feel. But you cannot give them the direct experience of redness. And spiritual awakening is far more subtle than even that. So what happens when you insist on sharing this experience? You begin to sound like you're bragging. Oh, I've had this marvelous insight. I've seen the truth. I understand what life is really about. And immediately, you've created a division. You've put yourself over here as the awakened one, and the other person over there as the unawakened one. And in doing so, you've actually contradicted the very insight you were trying to share, which is that there is no division, no separation, no you and them. The awakened person learns to be quiet about their awakening. Not out of false modesty, but because they understand that talking about it is like a finger pointing at the moon. The finger is useful if someone wants to look where it's pointing. But if they're fascinated by the finger itself, they'll miss the moon entirely. And most people, when you try to share your awakening, become fascinated by your finger. They want to know what you did to get awakened. They want the technique, the method, the secret practice. But awakening didn't happen because you did something. It happened when you stopped doing and simply saw what was already there. The second thing you must never share is the specific practices or methods that worked for you. Now, this might sound contradictory. Surely if something worked for you, wouldn't it be helpful to tell others? But here's the trick. What worked for you worked because it was right for you. at that particular moment in your life. It fit your temperament, your situation, your particular flavor of confusion. Imagine you have a headache and you take a certain medicine and the headache goes away. Does this mean everyone with a headache should take that same medicine? Of course not. One person's headache might be from tension, another's from lack of sleep, another's from dehydration. The same medicine won't work for all of them. In fact, it might harm some of them. Spiritual practices are exactly like this. What brings one person to clarity might trap another person in technique. I might sit quietly and watch my breath, and in that watching, suddenly see through the illusion of the separate self. But if I tell you, you must sit and watch your breath, you might spend years sitting and watching and getting absolutely nowhere, because your particular knot is different from mine. There was a student who came to his teacher and said, "Master, I've been meditating for 5 years, just as you instructed, and I still haven't had any awakening." The teacher laughed and said, "Perhaps you should stop meditating." The student was shocked. "But you told me to meditate." "Yes," said the teacher, "and now I'm telling you to stop. You've turned meditation into another form of striving, another way of trying to become something you think you're not. Stop trying to be awakened and see if you're not already awake." You see, the moment you give someone a method, they turn it into a goal. They think, if I do this practice correctly, I will achieve enlightenment. And now they're further from awakening than when they started, because they've created a future moment when they imagine they'll be complete. But awakening is not in the future. It's only now. It's seeing what's already here, not creating something new. The third thing you must never share are your insights about other people. When you wake up, one of the things that happens is you begin to see people very clearly. You see through their masks, their pretenses, their games. You can see when someone is operating from fear, when they're defending an image, when they're lost in their own story. And there's a tremendous temptation to help them by pointing this out. But this is almost always a mistake. Why? Because people are not ready to see themselves until they're ready. And when they're ready, they'll see it themselves. They don't need you to tell them. In fact, if you tell them before they're ready, you'll only create resistance and resentment. Think about it this way. Suppose you see a butterfly struggling to emerge from its cocoon. You think, "Oh, I can't help. I'll cut open the cocoon and free the butterfly. But if you do this, the butterfly will die." Why? Because the struggle to emerge is what strengthens its wings. Without that struggle, it cannot fly. In the same way, people need to struggle with their own confusions in their own time. Your helpful insight, delivered before they're ready for it, might actually harm them. I remember sitting with a friend who was going on and on about how unfairly he'd been treated at his work. He'd been passed over for promotion, and he was convinced it was because his boss had something against him. Now, I could see quite clearly what was actually happening. My friend had a certain arrogance, a way of dismissing others' ideas that made him difficult to work with. This was the real reason he wasn't promoted. But did I tell him this? No. Because he wasn't asking to see himself clearly. He was asking for validation of his victim story. If I'd said, "Actually, you're rather arrogant and dismissive," what would have happened? He would have become defensive. He might have ended our friendship, and he still wouldn't have seen the truth, because he wasn't ready to see it. So instead, I listened. I made sympathetic noises. And then months later, without any prompting from me, he suddenly said, "You know, I think I might have been a bit difficult to work with." There it was. The insight arose in him naturally when he was ready for it. The awakened person learns to trust this natural process. They don't rush around trying to enlighten everyone. They understand that consciousness awakens in its own time, like a flower opening in the morning. You cannot force the petals open. You can only provide the right conditions and then step back. The fourth thing you must never share is your experience of the void, the emptiness, the fundamental groundlessness of existence. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing to share, because it can be deeply disturbing to someone who isn't ready for it. You see, when you really wake up, one of the things you see is that there's nothing solid anywhere. Everything you thought was permanent and real turns out to be more like a dance, a flow, a process. Your own sense of self, which feels so solid and continuous, is actually more like a river. You can say there's a river, but if you try to grab it, you get nothing but water passing through your fingers. The river is not a thing. It's a happening. Now, this realization can be incredibly liberating. It means you're not stuck being who you think you are. It means all your problems, all your anxieties, all your carefully constructed identities are like clouds passing through the sky. But to someone who hasn't seen this yet, it sounds terrifying. It sounds like you're saying nothing matters, that everything is meaningless, that we're all just random collections of atoms bouncing around with no purpose. I once made the mistake of trying to explain this to a colleague. We were having dinner, and he was talking about his plans for the future, all the things he wanted to achieve, the person he wanted to become. And I said rather unwisely, "You know, there really is no you to achieve anything. What you call yourself is just a pattern, a habit of thought. It's not real in the way you think it's real." Well, he looked at me as if I'd just announced I was going to rob a bank. "What are you talking about?" he said. "Of course I'm real. I'm sitting right here. I have thoughts, feelings, memories. How can you say I'm not real?" And then he became quite upset. He thought I was denying his existence, dismissing his life as meaningless. What I was actually trying to say is that he's real, but not in the way he imagines. He's not a separate, isolated self trapped in a bag of skin. He's the whole universe expressing itself as a particular pattern called him. But he couldn't hear this because it threatened his entire sense of identity. And without a stable sense of identity, he felt he would fall apart. This is why the great teachers throughout history have been very careful about who they share the deepest teachings with. They understood that these teachings are like medicine. In the right dose, at the right time, they heal. In the wrong dose at the wrong time, they poison. The truth about emptiness, about the void, about the groundlessness of existence, this truth must be approached gradually, gently, or it can shatter someone's world before they have the capacity to rebuild it. And the fifth thing you must never share is your sense of ultimate freedom and why you no longer feel bound by conventional rules and morality. When you wake up, you see that all the rules, all the shoulds and shouldn'ts, all the moral codes and social conventions are just agreements, games we've all decided to play. And you realize you're free to play or not play as you choose. But if you announce this to people, if you say, "I'm beyond good and evil, I no longer follow conventional morality, because I see it's all just made up," people will think you've become dangerous. They'll think you're going to start robbing banks or harming people, because you no longer believe in moral rules. What they don't understand is that true freedom is not the freedom to harm. When you really wake up, you see that harming others is harming yourself, because there is no real separation. The person you hurt is just another aspect of the same consciousness that you are. So naturally, spontaneously, you treat others with kindness, not because a rule tells you to, but because that's what flows naturally from the understanding of unity. A truly free person follows the spirit of the law while being free of the letter of the law. They act morally not out of fear of punishment or hope of reward, but because moral action is simply what happens when you see clearly. They're kind not because kindness is virtuous, but because unkindness would be as strange as punching yourself in the face. But try explaining this to someone who still believes morality comes from external authority, from God or society, or some cosmic rule book. They cannot understand how you can be both free from morally rules and yet act morally. To them it seems like a contradiction. So they assume you're either lying about your freedom or you're secretly immoral and just haven't acted on it yet. The awakened person learns to follow social conventions, even while knowing their convention. They play the game because not playing would create unnecessary conflict and confusion. They pay their bills, they obey traffic laws, they treat people with respect, not because they must, but because it's simply easier and more harmonious to do so. They're like a master actor who knows it's all a play, but gives their performance everything they've got anyway. So there you have it. 5 things you must never share if you are spiritually awake. Your direct experience of awakening, your specific practices and methods, your insights about other people, your understanding of emptiness and groundlessness, and your sense of freedom from conventional morality. Does this mean you can never talk about spiritual matters? Of course not. But there's a difference between pointing towards something and claiming to have captured it. There's a difference between offering a possibility and insisting on a conclusion. The awakened person speaks, but they speak lightly. They suggest rather than assert. They invite rather than command. They know that words are fingers pointing at the moon, and they never confuse the finger with the moon itself. And perhaps most importantly, they've learned that the deepest teaching is not in words at all. It's in presence. It's in the way they move through the world. It's in their laugh, their silence, their simple being. People might not understand what you say about awakening, but they can feel when they're in the presence of someone who's awake. They feel it as a kind of peace, a kind of spaciousness, a sense that this person is somehow at home in the universe, in a way that most people aren't. So be quiet about your awakening. Live it rather than talk about it. And trust that those who are ready to wake up will wake up, not because you pushed them, but because consciousness itself is waking up through all of us, each in our own time, each in our own way. You're not the awakener. You're just another expression of the awakening that's always already happening. And if someone really wants to know, if they really come to you with genuine curiosity and readiness, then by all means speak. But speak as one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread, not as someone who has arrived telling someone else how to get there. Because the beautiful secret is this: there's nowhere to get to. We're already there. We've always been there. We're just playing this magnificent game of pretending we're not.
The greatest revelation isn't something we discover. It's something we remember. We're born knowing how to simply be, yet somewhere along the way, we forget. We trade our natural state for a desperate search to become something else. I find it fascinating that while we are climbing mountains and crossing oceans in search of awakening, the truth we seek has never left us. It's like the sun searching for light, or the ocean searching for water. Consider this. Right now, as you listen to these words, beneath all your thoughts and sensations, beneath all your hopes and fears, there is a silent presence, an awareness that's witnessing it all. This awareness is not something you do. It's what you are. Let's explore together this remarkable territory of simply being, not as a concept or philosophy, but as the living reality that we've somehow managed to overlook. The most extraordinary paradox I've encountered in my explorations is how we struggle with simply being when it's the most natural thing in the world. It's rather like a fish searching desperately for water while swimming in the ocean. You see, we are convinced that being is something we must achieve, something we must work towards. What an absurd situation. Consider this. You didn't come into this world. You came out of it like a leaf from a tree or a wave from the ocean. You are not a stranger here. Being is your birthright, your natural state, your fundamental essence, and yet we treat it as some distant achievement. Why is this? I suggest it's because we've been thoroughly hypnotized by our education, our language, our social conditioning to believe that we are separate from being. We've learned to think of ourselves as lonely little egos trapped in bags of skin, desperately trying to make contact with the world outside ourselves. What a hallucination! What a magnificent hoax we've played on ourselves. You are being itself, expressing itself as this particular form in this particular moment. The paradox dissolves when you realize you've been trying to become what you already are. Now, let's look at this curious obsession with becoming. The Western mind particularly is hypnotized by progress, by development, by the notion that you must constantly improve yourself. What a treadmill we've created. Always running, never arriving. You see, the idea of becoming rests on a fundamental deception, that you are not already what you're seeking to become. It's as if the sun were trying to become bright, or water were trying to become wet. How unnecessary, how utterly redundant. I've often observed that this compulsive becoming is like trying to reach the horizon. The faster you run toward it, the faster it moves away from you. And this creates a peculiar form of suffering that I call the backwards law. The more desperately you try to be something, the more you reinforce the feeling that you are not that thing. The Zen masters understood this perfectly. That's why they would say things like, if you seek the Buddha, you cannot find the Buddha. Because in seeking, you imply absence. But what if you're already complete? What if there's nothing to improve? What if the very idea of self-improvement is the only obstacle to discovering your inherent perfection? Now that is a thought worth contemplating. Time, you see, is central to our inability to simply be. Because being is always now, whereas becoming is always projected into some imaginary future. I find it fascinating that we've developed a way of experiencing life where we're almost never present. We are constantly remembering the past or anticipating the future. But life only happens now. The past exists only as memory, the future only as imagination. Both are mental constructs appearing in the present moment. You see, now is the only time there ever is. When will you ever experience anything other than now? Even when you remember the past, you're remembering now. When you anticipate the future, you're anticipating now. So this eternal present is the realm of being. It's where life actually happens. And yet we spend most of our time mentally rehearsing what hasn't happened yet or reviewing what no longer exists. What a way to miss your life entirely. I sometimes use the analogy of driving a car while looking only in the rearview mirror. You're so concerned with where you've been that you're not paying attention to where you are. Simply being invites us to drop this peculiar habit and experience life directly as it is right now. Now, one of the most persistent obstacles to simply being is our fascinating addiction to the illusion of control. We're convinced that if we could just manage everything properly, direct all the variables, then we'd finally be at peace. What a marvelous misconception. You see, the desire for control stems from a fundamental mistrust of the universe. It's as if we believe we're trapped in a hostile environment that must be subjugated, rather than a natural process that already includes us. I've often observed that trying to control life is like trying to control your handwriting by gripping the pen with white knuckles. The result is a rigid, trembling script. But when you relax your grip and let your hand flow naturally, the writing becomes fluid, natural, and far more beautiful. The Taoist sages understood this perfectly. They spoke of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or non-forcing. It's not about doing nothing. It's about allowing things to happen naturally, without interference, like a sailor who understands the wind and works with it rather than against it. Simply being involves surrendering this myth of control, not in a passive, fatalistic way, but in the recognition that you are not separate from the flowing process of the universe. You are that process. And in that recognition, there's nothing to control and no one to do the controlling. One of my favorite ways of understanding existence is as a form of play, not as a serious business with some grave purpose, but as a spontaneous expression of joy and creativity. You see, the universe isn't going anywhere. It isn't trying to achieve anything. It's more like music or dance. The purpose of music isn't to arrive at the final note. The purpose of dancing isn't to end up at a particular spot on the floor. The purpose, if we can even use that word, is the playing itself. The Hindu tradition calls this Leela, divine play. The idea that the entire cosmos is a kind of game that the Godhead is playing, not for any reason, but for the sheer delight of playing. When you understand this, you can begin to participate in life with a similar spirit, not always asking, what's the use of this, or where is this getting me, but simply engaging in the extraordinary miracle of existence for its own sake. A child building sandcastles doesn't worry that the tide will come in. The joy is in the building, not in the permanence of the result. Simply being is approaching life with this same playful spirit, finding delight in the dance rather than obsessing over where the dance might lead. There's a fascinating paradox at the heart of being that the Zen tradition expresses beautifully. It's what I like to call the empty fullness, or the full emptiness. You see, when you genuinely allow yourself to simply be, you discover something quite startling. There's no solid you to be found anywhere. What we call I, or myself, is not a thing, but a process. Not a noun, but a verb. It's rather like trying to find the dancer apart from the dance. When you look closely, there is only dancing. No solid entity called dancer can be found. The Buddha's insight into anatta, or no self, wasn't a depressing nihilism. It was a liberating recognition that what we are is not limited to this temporary form. We are the formless taking form. This emptiness is not a vacuum. It's pregnant with possibility, like the empty space in a cup that makes the cup useful, or the empty space in a room that makes the room livable. So in simply being, we're not trying to be something or someone specific. We're allowing ourselves to be this boundless, indefinable aliveness that has no edges, no limitations. And paradoxically, in this emptiness, we find a fullness beyond anything we could have imagined. Now, one of the most persistent illusions that prevents us from simply being is what I like to call the myth of the skin-encapsulated ego. This is the belief that you are inside your skin and the world is outside. What a peculiar idea. When you really consider it, where exactly does the boundary lie? Is the air in your lungs you or not you? What about the bacteria in your intestines, without which you couldn't digest food? Are they you or not you? You see, the line between self and other is arbitrary at best. It's a social convention, a useful fiction perhaps, but not an absolute reality. I've often suggested that we're more like whirlpools in a flowing river. The whirlpool has a recognizable pattern, a temporary identity, but it's inseparable from the water that flows through it. You can't take a whirlpool out of the water because there is no whirlpool apart from the water's movement. Similarly, you are a pattern of energy in the total energy field of the universe. Not separate from it, not inside it, but it expressing itself as this unique configuration called you for a brief time. When we recognize this, simply being becomes natural. There's no separate self that needs to achieve or become. There's just the universe doing what it does, which includes this temporary pattern we call me. Let me share with you this marvelous Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which I touched on earlier, but which deserves its own exploration. Wu Wei is often translated as non-action or non-doing, but I prefer to think of it as effortless action or the art of not forcing. You see, there's a profound difference between making something happen and allowing it to happen, between forcing and flowing. Most of us have been taught to approach life like a conquest, something to be wrestled into submission. But the Taoist masters observed nature and saw something quite different. Water doesn't struggle to flow downhill. Trees don't strain to grow. These things happen naturally, of themselves. The Chinese call this zhujian, which means of itself so, or spontaneity. It's the recognition that the universe has its own intelligence that far exceeds our conscious calculations. I'm reminded of the story of the centipede who was asked how it coordinated all its legs. Once it started thinking about it, it became paralyzed and couldn't walk at all. This is what happens when we try to control what is best left to our innate intelligence. Simply being involves trusting this natural wisdom, not fighting against life, but dancing with it, not imposing our will upon the universe, but aligning ourselves with its flow, and in this alignment, we discover a kind of effortless power that accomplishes more than our striving ever could. One of the most fascinating aspects of simply being is embracing uncertainty. You see, the ego craves certainty. It wants everything neatly categorized, labeled, and controlled. It wants to know exactly what will happen next. But reality is fundamentally uncertain. It's always in flux, always surprising, always new. And there's a profound wisdom in acknowledging this. I've often suggested that clinging to certainty is like trying to grab hold of water. The tighter you squeeze, the less you have. But if you open your hand and allow the water to rest there, it remains with you. The Zen tradition speaks of beginner's mind, or shoshin. It's the art of approaching each moment fresh, without preconceptions, without certainty, like a child seeing snow for the first time. When we embrace uncertainty, something remarkable happens. We become available to the actual reality of the present moment, rather than our ideas about it. We discover that what we don't know is infinitely more interesting than what we think we know. And paradoxically, in this state of not knowing, of openness and receptivity, we find a kind of certainty that's much deeper than intellectual knowledge. It's the certainty of being itself, which requires no proof or validation. It simply is. In this final chapter, I'd like to suggest that simply being is not something esoteric or separate from ordinary life. It's not a special state reserved for mystics or hermits on mountaintops. It's the natural recognition of what we have been all along. You see, what we're seeking is not something new or different from what we already are. It's more like coming to recognize that we've been wearing glasses all our lives, glasses that we mistook for our eyes themselves. The Zen masters have a wonderful saying: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities are the same, but the understanding is profoundly different. In simply being, we're not trying to escape the ordinary world. We're discovering the extraordinary within the ordinary. We're recognizing that this moment, exactly as it is, with all its imperfections and messiness, is the perfect expression of being itself. I'm reminded of the Zen story of the monk who asked his master, "What is enlightenment?" The master replied, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The monk protested, "But that's what everyone does." And the master said, "No, most people when eating are thinking of 1,000 other things. When sleeping, they're dreaming 1,000 dreams. They're never fully present in what they're doing." Simply being is this awakening to the fullness of our ordinary existence. It's the recognition that we don't need to become anything. We don't need to add anything to this moment. We are already complete. We are already whole. We are already exactly what we seek. So you see, this business of simply being isn't about acquiring some new spiritual technique or achieving some exotic state of consciousness. It's about recognizing what has been true all along. You are not separate from the universe. You are not a tiny fragment in a vast, indifferent cosmos. You are the entire process of reality expressing itself as this unique form in this unique moment. As I like to say, You are the universe experiencing itself as a human for a little while. And in simply being, you allow that extraordinary truth to reveal itself naturally, without force, without struggle. So I invite you to let go of the exhausting effort to become something else. Let go of the idea that you need to improve, fix, or transform yourself. Instead, simply be. Be this aliveness that you already are. Be this awareness that's reading these words. Be this mysterious, indefinable presence that can never be captured in concepts or words. And in that simple being, you might just discover that what you've been seeking all along is what's been present from the very beginning. The treasure was always buried in your own backyard. You just needed to stop looking elsewhere to find it. You know, there's something quite amusing about the human predicament. Here we are, constantly striving, reaching, yearning to arrive somewhere, to become something, to finally get there wherever there might be. And all the while we fail to notice the extraordinary joke that's playing out. The cosmic punchline that's been waiting patiently for us to discover. What if I told you that this magnificent journey you're so earnestly pursuing is already complete? That you've been standing at your destination all along while frantically trying to get somewhere else? It's rather like a fish swimming desperately through the ocean in search of water. Or perhaps more accurately, like a person who's forgotten they're wearing glasses and is turning the whole house upside down looking for them. Today I'd like to share with you some reflections on this most curious situation we find ourselves in. Let's begin by examining this persistent feeling that we need to get somewhere. This nagging sensation that we're not quite there yet, that we're somehow incomplete, unfinished, like a painting still waiting for the artist's final brush strokes. Have you ever noticed how peculiar our language is about time and accomplishment? We speak of getting ahead and falling behind. We talk about making progress and reaching goals, as if life were some sort of linear track upon which we're all racing toward a finish line. But I want to ask you something rather impertinent. Where exactly are you going? And more importantly, who is this you that believes it's going somewhere? You see, this entire sensation of journeying is built upon a fundamental misconception. The misconception that you are a separate something moving through time and space toward another separate something called a destination. But what if the truth is far more fascinating? What if you aren't moving through the world at all? What if the world is simply moving through you, like waves passing through water without the water itself going anywhere at all? Consider for a moment the extraordinary effort we invest in this illusion. We plan and we strive and we struggle and we sweat. We set ourselves targets and deadlines and milestones. We measure our progress. We compare ourselves to others who seem to be further along this imaginary path. And then when we finally reach whatever arbitrary marker we've set for ourselves, what happens? Do we finally arrive? Do we at last experience the completeness we've been seeking? No, of course not. We simply set a new destination, a new goal, a new milestone. And off we go again, perpetually journeying, never arriving. It's as if we're caught in a kind of hypnosis, a trance state in which we're convinced that happiness, fulfillment, peace, love, or whatever it is we're seeking lies somewhere up ahead, just around the next bend, just beyond the next achievement. But let me share a little secret with you. This journey that feels so real, so necessary, so urgent, it's a kind of magnificent hallucination. It's a game we're playing with ourselves. And the joke is that what we're looking for, we already are. Where we're trying to get to, we already stand. Now, this brings us to a most delicious paradox. The paradox of arrival. Consider for a moment what happens when you actually do reach a destination you've been seeking. Let's say you've been climbing a mountain. For hours, perhaps days, you've been straining upward, eyes fixed on the summit, telling yourself, when I get to the top, then I'll have made it. Then I'll be satisfied. And then at last you arrive. You stand upon the peak. You breathe the thin, clear air. You gaze at the magnificent panorama spread out before you. And for a brief, shimmering moment, there's a sense of accomplishment, of completion. But how long does this feeling last? 5 minutes? An hour? Already your mind is turning to the descent, or to the next mountain you might climb, or to something else entirely. You see, the mind is rather like a donkey with a carrot dangled before its nose. The poor creature trots forward, believing it will eventually reach the carrot. But of course the carrot moves forward at precisely the same pace. So the donkey never actually gets any closer to the carrot, despite all its earnest trotting. This is the trap we've set for ourselves. We keep moving the finish line. We keep redefining what it means to arrive, and in doing so, we ensure that we never truly do arrive anywhere at all. But what if, and this is where it gets truly interesting, what if arrival isn't something that happens in the future? What if it isn't an event at all? What if arrival is simply the recognition that you're already here? After all, where else could you possibly be? You're always here. You've never been anywhere else. You've never been in the past. You were here then too, only here looked different. And you've certainly never been in the future. So in a very real sense, you've already arrived. You've never been anywhere but the destination. The journey was always an illusion, a kind of dream from which we can awaken at any moment. This reminds me of a story about a Zen master who was asked by his disciple, "Master, what is enlightenment?" The master replied, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The disciple was perplexed. "But Master, doesn't everyone do that?" "No," said the master. "When most people eat, they are thinking about 1,000 other things. When they sleep, they are dreaming 1,000 dreams. They are never fully present where they are. You see, the journey ends the moment you recognize that you're already where you need to be. Not because you've reached some imaginary finish line, but because you've woken up from the hypnotic trance that told you that you needed to get somewhere else in the first place." Now, if you've followed me this far, you might be wondering why we play this curious game with ourselves. Why do we persist in this illusion of journeying when we're already at the destination? I rather think it's because we're playing a cosmic game of hide and seek. You see, the universe, or God, or the Tao, or whatever name you prefer to give to that which fundamentally is the universe, appears to delight in losing itself in order to find itself again. It's as if the ultimate reality decided that the one thing it couldn't experience was limitation, ignorance, confusion. The one game it couldn't play was the game of search and discovery. And so, it fragmented itself. It pretended to be many instead of one. It pretended to be you and me, and trees and mountains and galaxies. It pretended to forget its own nature. And now, here we are, the universe playing at being human, convinced that we're separate entities on individual journeys, seeking something that seems to lie beyond ourselves. Isn't that the most marvelous game? The most exquisite joke? That what you're looking for is what's looking. That the seeker is the sought. That the beginning and end of the journey are the same point, viewed from different perspectives. Let me put it another way. Imagine a flashlight in a completely dark room. The flashlight is searching for the source of its own light. It keeps looking outward, trying to find what's generating the illumination. But of course it can never discover this source by looking externally, because the source is itself. That's rather like our situation. We're looking everywhere for what we already are. We're seeking outside ourselves for what can only be found within, or rather, for what is doing the seeking in the first place. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that this game of hide and seek is meaningless, or that we should stop playing it. On the contrary, it's a magnificent game, a thrilling adventure. The universe wouldn't have bothered to create it if it weren't worth playing. What I am suggesting, though, is that we might play it with a bit more awareness, with a twinkle in our eye, with the recognition that beneath all the earnest striving and struggling is a cosmic dance of hide and seek, a game the universe is playing with itself through us. And perhaps, just perhaps, if we can see it this way, the journey becomes less of a burden and more of a delight. less of a desperate search and more of a playful exploration, less of a means to an end and more of a dance for its own sake. Let's turn now to this curious idea we call progress. This notion that we're moving gradually but surely towards some better state, some improved condition, some more evolved form of being. It's really quite fascinating how deeply this myth has embedded itself in our collective consciousness. We speak of progressing in our careers, in our relationships, in our spiritual practices. We talk about technological progress, social progress, moral progress. And underlying all of this is the fundamental assumption that we are incomplete as we are, that we are unfinished products, works in progress, rough drafts in need of continual revision and improvement. But I want to propose something rather revolutionary. What if progress itself is the very illusion that keeps us from recognizing our inherent completeness? What if this linear view of time, this idea that we're moving from a less perfect past toward a more perfect future, is precisely what blinds us to the perfection that already exists? Consider a river. We might say that the river progresses from its source in the mountains to its destination in the sea. But does the river experience itself this way? Does it feel that it's incomplete until it reaches the ocean? Does it anxiously check its progress, worrying that it's not flowing fast enough? Of course not. The river simply flows. It's fully river at every point along its journey. It's not more river when it reaches the sea than when it's cascading down a mountain slope. It's river all the way through. Or think about a tree. Is an acorn less complete than a sapling? Is a sapling less complete than a mature oak? From a certain perspective, we might say yes. But from another perspective, each stage is perfect and complete in itself. The acorn isn't trying to become a tree. It's simply expressing its acorn nature, which includes the potential to transform. You see, the whole idea of progress implies that what is here now is somehow lacking. It suggests that this present moment, this present manifestation, is somehow insufficient or inadequate. And yet, when we look deeply into the nature of reality, what do we find? We find that everything is exactly as it must be, given all the conditions and causes that have led to this moment. The oak tree doesn't look at the acorn and think how primitive, how undeveloped. It recognizes the acorn as its own self in another form. The ocean doesn't look at the mountain stream and think, when will you finally get here and become complete? It knows that the stream is already water, already perfect in its own way, and so it is with us. We are not incomplete beings heading toward completion. We are complete beings expressing our nature in constantly changing forms. The journey from birth to death isn't a progression from incompleteness to completeness. It's a dance of transformation, a symphony of change, in which each note is as essential and as perfect as every other. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should stop learning, growing, or exploring. That would be absurd. Learning and change are part of our nature. What I am suggesting is that we might release this burdensome idea that we're somehow lacking until we reach some imagined future state. What if instead we could recognize the completeness that's already here? What if we could see that the journey and the destination are not separate things but different aspects of the same reality is less than #0. 5# is greater than. This brings us to a particularly slippery and fascinating aspect of our discussion. The curious question of who or what is actually undertaking this journey we're so convinced we're on. You see, we tend to assume that there's a solid, continuous I who was born at a certain point in the past, who exists now, and who will continue to exist into the future until death. We believe that this I is the thinker of our thoughts, the feeler of our feelings, the doer of our actions. And it's this I who is supposedly journeying towards some destination or other. But when we look closely, when we really examine this supposedly solid I, what do we find? Where exactly is it located? Is it in your head? Your chest? Your fingertips? Is it your body? But your body is constantly changing, cells dying and being replaced, energy flowing in and out. Is it your mind? But your mind is also in constant flux, thoughts arising and passing, moods shifting, perspectives evolving. So what precisely is this I that's supposedly on a journey? The closer we look, the more we discover that this solid I is nowhere to be found. What we do find is a flowing process, a dance of energies, a symphony of interconnected elements, all affecting and being affected by each other. It's rather like a whirlpool in a stream. From a distance, a whirlpool looks like a distinct entity, a thing that exists separately from the water around it. But when we look more closely, we see that the whirlpool is nothing but water in a particular pattern of motion. There's no separate whirlpool entity apart from the water itself. And yet, the pattern is real. The whirlpool does exist, just not as the kind of solid, separate thing we might have assumed. And so it is with us. We are like whirlpools in the river of life, patterns of energy, temporary formations in the flow of existence. We are not separate from the flow. We are the flow, temporarily manifesting in this particular pattern we call a human being. This insight leads to a rather startling conclusion. If there's no solid I who's journeying, then who or what is it that's supposedly incomplete? Who or what is it that's supposedly progressing towards some future state of completion? It's a bit like asking who is dancing the dance. We tend to assume that first there's a dancer and then there's a dance that the dancer performs. But what if the truth is that there's just dancing happening? What if the dancer and the dance are not two separate things but one singular event? The mystics and sages of various traditions have been pointing to this for centuries. The Hindu concept of anatta, or no self, the Buddhist teaching of emptiness, the Taoist view of flowing with the Tao, all suggest that what we call I is not a fixed entity journeying through life, but rather life itself flowing through this particular configuration of elements we conventionally call a person. And if that's the case, if there's no separate self that's journeying, then the whole idea of incompleteness, of progress toward completion, becomes wonderfully laughable. It's like a wave in the ocean worrying about whether it's ocean enough. The wave is not separate from the ocean. It is the ocean, temporarily expressing itself in wave form. So are you. So am I. We are the universe temporarily expressing itself in human form. And in that sense, we've never been anything but complete. We've never been anything but exactly what we are. The journey, you see, is not toward completion. It's toward the recognition of the completion that's already here. Let's dive deeper into this curious thing we call now, this present moment that somehow we find so difficult to fully inhabit. It's really quite extraordinary when you think about it. Now is the only time that ever exists. The past is gone, nothing but memory traces in the present. The future hasn't arrived yet, nothing but anticipatory thoughts in the present. All that ever exists, all that ever has existed or will exist, is this eternal now. And yet, how rarely we are fully here. How seldom we inhabit this moment completely. We're constantly leaning forward into the future or backward into the past. Always somewhere else, anywhere but here. This habit of mind, this chronic dis-ease with the present, is intimately connected with our illusion of journeying. We think we're moving from the past toward the future. We imagine that fulfillment lies ahead of us, not here where we stand. We tell ourselves stories about how things used to be better, or how they will be better once we reach some imagined destination. But what if the now is not merely a fleeting moment between past and future? What if it's not just a razor-thin slice of time that's gone almost before we can notice it? What if the now is actually all there is? What if it contains everything? Consider the metaphor of a film projector. When we watch a movie, we have the impression of continuous movement, of a story unfolding over time. But what's actually happening? The projector is showing us a rapid succession of still frames. Each frame is complete in itself. It's our mind that creates the illusion of movement, of progress, of a journey from beginning to end. Similarly, what we experience as the flow of time might actually be a succession of complete perfect nows. Each now is not lacking anything. Each now is not progressing toward anything. Each now simply is, in its fullness, in its suchness, in its completeness. The 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart put it rather beautifully when he said, "The now moment in which God made the first man, and the now moment in which the last man will disappear, and the now moment in which I am speaking, are all one in God, where there is only one now." What if that's true? What if all of time is actually contained within this eternal now? What if the journey we think we're on from past to future, from incompleteness to completion, is actually an illusion created by our linear thinking? When I look at a tree, I don't see it as an incomplete thing striving to become something else. I see it as a perfect expression of treeness in this moment. Yes, it's growing and changing, but not because it's incomplete. It's growing and changing because that's what trees do. That's their nature. And so it is with us. We're not incomplete beings striving toward completion. We are complete beings whose nature includes growth and change and transformation. The journey isn't towards some future state of perfection. The journey is the ongoing expression of the perfection that's already here. This is what I mean when I say the journey is already complete. Not that there's no movement or change or growth, but rather that all of this movement and change and growth is happening within a context of underlying completeness, like waves on the surface of an ocean that's already perfectly ocean. The challenge, and it's quite a delicious challenge, is to awaken to this completeness that's already here. To recognize that the now doesn't need to be improved upon or progressed beyond. It only needs to be fully inhabited, fully experienced, fully lived. And when we do that, when we drop fully into the now, we discover something quite remarkable. We discover that what we've been seeking through all our journeying has been here all along. We discover that the peace, the fulfillment, the aliveness we've been chasing after was never elsewhere. It was right here, in the simple, ordinary miracle of being fully present to what is. Now, let's examine one of the most subtle and pervasive barriers to recognizing the completeness that's already here. I'm talking about language, about the way we name and categorize and conceptualize our experience. You see, the moment we put a label on something, we create a separation. We draw a boundary around it. We say, this is a tree, and that is not a tree. This is me, and that is not me. This is the journey, and that is the destination. But nature doesn't come with labels attached. The universe doesn't arrive pre-divided into the categories we impose upon it. These divisions are constructs of our minds, useful for certain purposes, but not reflective of the underlying reality. Consider the simple act of naming yourself. The moment you say, I am John, or I am Mary, you've created a conceptual entity, a fixed, separate self that stands apart from everything else. And once you've done that, you've set the stage for the whole drama of journeying, of incompleteness, seeking completion. Because now there's a separate you who feels incomplete and a separate goal that promises completion. But what if we could look beyond names and labels? What if we could experience reality directly, without the mediation of concepts? What might we discover? The Zen tradition offers a lovely pointer in this direction. There's a famous koan that asks, what was your original face before your parents were born? It's an invitation to look beyond the constructed self, beyond the named and labeled identity, to something more fundamental. Or, as the Tao Te Ching puts it, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The reality that we're attempting to capture with our words and concepts is always more than our words and concepts can contain. This isn't to say that language is bad or wrong. It's a marvelous tool, indispensable for certain purposes. But like any tool, it has its limitations. And One of those limitations is that it tends to fragment what is essentially whole. It divides what is fundamentally unified. When I look at a sunset, I can describe it as having colors red, orange, gold. But in doing so, I've already divided what is actually a seamless gradient of light. I've imposed boundaries where nature has none. Similarly, when I speak of myself as separate from the world, as journeying through life towards some destination, I've imposed conceptual boundaries on what is actually a unified field of being. I've created the illusion of separation where there is only interconnection. So what might happen if we could temporarily set aside this habit of naming and dividing? What might we experience if we could drop beneath the level of concepts and directly encounter what is? I suspect we might discover what the mystics and poets have been pointing to all along, that we are not separate from the world, but are the world, temporarily localized in this particular form. That we are not fragmentary beings seeking wholeness, but are wholeness itself, playing at being fragments. That we are not incomplete travelers on a journey toward completion, but are the journey and the destination in one indivisible reality. And in that recognition, the whole edifice of seeking and striving and journeying might just collapse like a house of cards. Not because we've finally arrived somewhere, but because we've recognized that we were never anywhere else. Now, if what I've been suggesting is true, if the journey is already complete, if what we're seeking is what's seeking, then a profound question arises. How do we live in the light of this recognition? How do we navigate this curious existence once we've glimpsed the cosmic joke at its heart? And here, I believe we arrive at the art of letting go. You see, for most of us, life is characterized by a kind of chronic tension, a holding on, a grasping. We grasp at pleasurable experiences, trying to prolong them. We push away painful experiences, trying to avoid them. We cling to certain ideas about who we are and what we need. We grasp at goals and achievements, believing they'll finally bring us the satisfaction we crave. And all of this grasping, this holding on, creates suffering. Because the nature of life is flow, is change. Nothing stays the same. Nothing can be grasped and held permanently. It's like trying to clutch at flowing water. The tighter we grip, the more it slips through our fingers. But what happens when we let go? Not in the sense of giving up or becoming passive, but in the sense of releasing the tension of grasping, in the sense of surrendering to what is, rather than constantly fighting against it or trying to reshape it according to our preferences. Something quite extraordinary happens when we let go. We discover a kind of freedom that no amount of achieving or acquiring could ever provide. We discover the liberty of being fully present to what is, without the compulsion to change it or control it or judge it. It's rather like swimming in a powerful river. If you fight against the current, you'll exhaust yourself and possibly drown. But if you relax and flow with the current, you can navigate skillfully, using the river's own power rather than struggling against it. This is what the Taoists call wu-wei action, without forcing, effort without struggle. It's not passivity or laziness. It's a kind of intelligent surrender, a way of aligning ourselves with the flow of life rather than constantly fighting against it. And in this surrender, this letting go, we discover something paradoxical. We find that we are most effective, most creative, most alive when we stop trying so hard. When we release the tight grip of the controlling ego and allow something larger than ourselves to move through us. The great artists and athletes and scientists often report this experience. They talk about being in the zone or in the flow, where the small self seems to step aside and something greater takes over, where action happens with a kind of effortless grace that couldn't be achieved through willpower alone. This, I believe, is a glimpse of what life might be like when we recognize that the journey is already complete. When we stop striving towards some imagined future state of perfection and instead open ourselves to the perfection that's already here. Not a static perfection, but a dynamic, flowing, ever-changing perfection. Like the perfection of a river, which is perfect, not despite its constant change, but because of it. To live this way requires a profound trust. Trust in life itself. Trust in the process. Trust that what's unfolding, however it may appear from our limited perspective, is exactly what needs to be unfolding. It doesn't mean we never take action or make choices. Of course we do. But we do so from a different place, not from the anxious striving of the separate self that feels incomplete, but from the grounded presence of the whole self that knows it is already complete. And from this place of wholeness, this place of trust, our actions take on a different quality. They become less driven by fear and need, more infused with love and creativity. They become less about getting somewhere else and more about expressing what's already here. Less about becoming something in the future and more about being fully what we are now. This is the art of letting go, not once in some dramatic moment of surrender, but again and again in each unfolding moment of our lives. Letting go of the need to control. Letting go of the belief in our incompleteness. Letting go of the illusion that what we're looking for is somewhere other than where we stand. And in this letting go, we paradoxically find what we've been seeking all along. Not because we've finally grasped it, but because we've stopped grasping altogether. We're approaching the heart of the matter now. The innermost secret of this whole business of journeying and seeking. And it's so simple, so obvious, that it's almost impossible to see. What we're looking for is what's looking. Consider for a moment the analogy of a mirror. A mirror can reflect everything except itself. It can show you your face, your body, your surroundings. But the one thing it can never show you is the mirror itself. Similarly, consciousness, this mysterious capacity for awareness that is reading these words right now, can be aware of virtually everything except itself. It can perceive sights, sounds, sensations, thoughts, emotions. It can even be aware of the concept of consciousness. But can consciousness directly perceive itself? Can the eye see itself seeing? Can awareness be aware of awareness? This creates a curious blind spot, a kind of cosmic hide-and-seek game. The very thing that's looking, the awareness, the consciousness that you are, is precisely what you can't see. And so, not realizing that what you're looking for is what's looking, you search everywhere else. You look outward for what can only be found by looking inward, or rather by recognizing that the inward and outward are not two separate realms, but one unified field of being. The great spiritual traditions have been pointing to this insight for centuries, each in their own way. The Hindu tradition speaks of Tattvam Asi, thou art that. The Buddhist tradition points to the non-duality of subject and object. The Christian mystics talk about finding God within, about recognizing that the kingdom of heaven is already here. All are suggesting in their different ways that what we're seeking is not separate from us. That the divine, the absolute, the ground of being, whatever we want to call it, is not something other, not something elsewhere, not something to be attained in the future. It is what we already are in our deepest nature. And yet, paradoxically, this recognition can feel like the most elusive thing in the world. Because we're so conditioned to look outward, to seek in the world of objects what can only be found in the subject itself. It's rather like a fish that spent its whole life searching for water. Swimming this way and that, growing increasingly desperate, asking other fish if they know where this mysterious water might be found, until one day, perhaps, it has the startling realization, oh, this thing I'm swimming in, that I've been swimming in all along, this is water. I was looking for what I was already immersed in. And so it is with us. We're looking for what we already are. We're seeking what's already here. We're trying to become what we already are. The journey, you see, isn't from here to there. It isn't from incompleteness to completion. It's from forgetting to remembering, from unconsciousness to consciousness, from ignorance of our true nature to recognition of what we've been all along. And this recognition isn't something that happens once and for all. It isn't a finish line we cross. It's a continuous unfolding, a deepening intimacy with the mystery of being. It's like falling in love with existence itself, over and over again, in each new moment. And each time we remember, each time we catch a glimpse of the truth that what we're seeking is what's seeking, the burden of journeying falls away. The anxiety of incompleteness dissolves. We discover that we're already home, that we've never been anywhere else, and that the journey we thought we were on was always just a way of coming back to what we already are. And so we arrive at the final chapter of our exploration. The cosmic joke, the divine comedy, the ultimate punchline that's been waiting for us all along. You see, there's something inherently humorous about this whole situation we find ourselves in. We're like someone who's misplaced their glasses and is frantically searching the house for them, only to eventually realize they've been wearing them the whole time. Or like someone who's been carrying a heavy burden for miles, convinced it's necessary, only to open the pack and discover it's filled with rocks that could have been discarded at any point. The cosmic joke is that what we've been seeking through all our journeying, all our striving and struggling and achieving and becoming has been right here all along. Not hidden, not distant, not requiring any special effort to reach. But so close, so obvious, so ever-present, that we've overlooked it. It's like the old story of the fish who meets a turtle. The turtle has just returned from a visit to the land, and he tells the fish about this extraordinary substance called water that he encountered there. The fish becomes intrigued and asks the turtle where he might find some of this water. The turtle laughs and says, "Why, you're swimming in it right now." But the fish isn't convinced. "This," he says, flicking his tail dismissively, this is just what is. How could this be the wondrous water you're speaking of?" And isn't that our situation exactly? We're swimming in the very thing we're seeking. We're immersed in it. We're made of it. And yet, because it's so close, so all-encompassing, so fundamental to our being, we don't recognize it. We keep looking elsewhere, convinced that what we're seeking must be something other than what already is. This is the joke that the universe is playing on itself through us. The game of hide and seek taken to its logical extreme, where the seeker and the sought are one and the same, playing at being separate in order to have the joy of rediscovery. And when we get the joke, when we really get it, not just intellectually but in our bones, in our very being, something marvelous happens. We laugh, not at ourselves, not at others, but with the universe itself. We join in the cosmic laughter that's been echoing through eternity. And in that laughter is liberation. In that laughter is the recognition that we've never been bound in the first place. That the journey we've been so earnestly pursuing was always just a play, a dance, a game that we've been playing with ourselves. This doesn't mean that life becomes trivial or meaningless. Quite the contrary. It becomes infinitely precious, infinitely significant, precisely because it's no longer weighed down by the burden of incompleteness, by the anxiety of becoming, by the fear of never arriving. When we recognize that the journey is already complete, that we are already what we're seeking to become, then life is no longer a means to an end. It's no longer a path to somewhere else. It becomes an expression of joy, of love, of the sheer delight of being. This reminds me of a Zen master who was asked by his disciple, "What is enlightenment?" The master replied, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The outward activities may look the same. We still live our lives, make our choices, face our challenges, experience our joys and sorrows. But the inner experience is transformed. We no longer carry the heavy burden of becoming. We no longer labor under the illusion of incompleteness. We recognize that what we are in our essential nature is already complete, already whole, already perfect, not in some static, unchanging way, but in the dynamic, flowing, ever-evolving way that life itself is perfect. And from this recognition arises a profound freedom. The freedom to play the game of life with full engagement but without attachment. The freedom to care deeply without getting caught in the drama. The freedom to be fully human, with all our peculiarities and quirks and limitations, while simultaneously recognizing the limitless awareness that shines through all these forms. This is what I mean when I say that the journey you insist on following is already complete. Not that there's no more to discover, no more to experience, no more to express, but that the underlying reality, the consciousness, the awareness, the being that you fundamentally are, is already whole, already complete, already perfect. And the great joke, the cosmic punchline, is that you already know this. At some level, beneath all the forgetting, beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the ideas about who you are and what you need to become, you already know that you are what you seek, that you are home, that you are complete. The journey, therefore, isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about remembering what you've always been. It's about recognizing the treasure that's been within you all along. It's about waking up from the dream of separation and incompleteness and rediscovering the wholeness that was never actually lost. And in that recognition, in that remembering, in that awakening, you may just find yourself laughing along with the cosmos at the most delightful joke of all that what you've been seeking so earnestly, so desperately, so diligently, has been what you are all along. As we come to the end of our time together, I invite you to pause, to take a deep breath, to feel the weight of your body wherever you're sitting or standing, to notice the sounds around you, the sensations in your body, the thoughts passing through your mind, and in this noticing, in this simple act of awareness, to recognize that what you're experiencing right now, this ordinary, extraordinary moment, is not a step on the way to somewhere else. It's not a means to an end. It's not a segment of a journey toward completion. It is the completion itself, taking this particular form in this particular moment. You are not a traveler on a journey toward wholeness. You are wholeness itself, temporarily appearing as a traveler. Not because you've achieved anything, or become anything, or arrived anywhere, but simply because it's what you've always been, beneath the stories, beneath the seeking, beneath the endless becoming. And if, as you go about your day, you find yourself forgetting this truth, getting caught up again in the drama of journeying, in the anxiety of incompleteness, that's perfectly fine too. That's also part of the dance. That's also an expression of the wholeness. But perhaps in those moments of forgetting, you might catch a glimmer, a hint, a whisper of remembering, a quiet voice saying, "You're already home, you're already complete, the journey you insist on following is already finished." And in that remembering, you might just find yourself smiling at the cosmic joke, the divine comedy, the play of consciousness that we call life. And in that smile is freedom. In that smile is peace. In that smile is the recognition that what you've been seeking has been what you are all along. Thank you for joining me in this exploration. Until we meet again, remember, the journey hasn't ended because you've finally arrived somewhere else. It's ended because you've recognized you were never anywhere but home.